Gaming is one of the most powerful cultural forces on the planet, immersive, creative, and endlessly social. Behind the headshots and high scores, there's something else happening. In certain corners of gaming culture, resentment is growing. Misogyny is normalised, and for some, these spaces are becoming gateways, not just for fantasy worlds, but to radical ideologies. This isn't just a few trolls or toxic players, it's about how online communities tied to gaming have evolved into echo chambers for hate, especially against women, and how that connects to a wider and more disturbing trend, the rise of Incel extremism. So how did we get here, and why is no one really talking about it? Let's unpack the hidden mechanics behind how gaming culture can fuel misogyny. Gaming has long been considered a male-dominated space, not by accident, but by design. From the 1980s onward, as home consoles entered by mainstream, marketing strategies were heavily skewed towards adolescent boys. Video game adverts from this era often featured explosions, sports, scantily clad women, and aggressive slogans, selling not just a product but a fantasy built on power, dominance, and sexual entitlement. Games themselves reflected this, with male protagonists overwhelmingly cast as soldiers, gangsters, or lone wolf heroes, hyper-masculine figures defined as soldiers by physical strength, emotional detachment, and control. Female characters, on the rare occasion they weren't entirely absent, were often passive, sexualized, or positioned as objects rather than individuals. The princess to be rescued, the girlfriend to avenge, the hyper-sexualized NPC providing a fan service. This early framing laid the cultural foundations of what gaming would become, even as the industry evolved and diversified, both in terms of its content and audience. The residue of these early choices lingered, despite nearly half of all gamers now being women. Most of the mainstream gaming community still operates under the assumption that women are outsiders, anomalies, or invaders in a boys' club. This creates an enduring gatekeeping mentality. Women who game, especially in online spaces, are frequently met with skepticism, hostility, or demands to prove their credibility. They're accused of being fake gamers, attention seekers, or trying to ruin the fun by advocating for inclusivity. This exclusion is often enforced not subtly but aggressively. In online multiplayer environments, especially those tied to competitive or shooter genres, female players are routinely harassed the moment they speak on voice chat. They report being inundated with sexist slurs, rape threats, or demands to leave the game. Some choose to avoid voice chat altogether or mask their gender to avoid confrontation. It's not limited to casual gamers either. Even professional female streamers and esports competitors face constant scrutiny, abuse, and the threat of doxing. Platforms that facilitate these interactions, such as Discord servers, Twitch chats, Reddit forums, and YouTube comment sections, often do little to curb this behaviour. Moderation is inconsistent, enforcement is lax, and toxic discord is frequently waved away as just jokes, or dismissed under the banner of free speech. This normalises hostility and creates an environment where bigotry is not only permitted, but becomes part of the culture. In many of these spaces, misogyny becomes kind of a social glue, a shared language used to bond, perform, and assert dominance. Even in games that don't encourage this behaviour explicitly, design choices can still reinforce the statu quo. Skimpy armour for female characters, exaggerated body proportions, and male-centric narratives all reinforce the message that women are accessories rather than equals in the gaming world. While there are developers and studios actively working to challenge this, creating complex female protagonists, diverse casts, and non-sexualised designs, they are often met with backlash from parts of the community who see such changes as politically motivated or threatening to the identity of real gaming. Ultimately, the result is a self-reinforcing cycle. Hostile environments drive women away, which in turn is used as evidence that they do not belong, justifying further hostility. The structural, cultural, and social mechanics that make gaming feel exclusatory to women are not the product of a few toxic individuals, but the outcomes of decades of design, marketing, and unchecked community norms. Unless these systems are actively challenged, both by industry leaders and communities themselves, gaming will continue to replicate the same harmful dynamics that push women to the margins and make space for more radical and extreme ideologies to take hold. The performative nature of online identities offers a powerful and often overlooked appeal, particularly for disaffected young men. In virtual environments, they can construct avatars and personas that embody everything they feel they lack in real life: strength, control, dominance, and status. Whether it's the silent, hyper-competent soldier in a first-person shooter, or the alpha male in a role-playing game with power, charisma, and sexual access, these characters serve as a wish fulfillment, digital stand-ins for their identities that fill out of reach offline. This kind of escapism is not inherently harmful. In fact, it's a core appeal of gaming and storytelling more broadly. Everyone seeks refuge from reality at times, and interactive media offers a unique kind of immersion and empowerment. But this escapism becomes problematic when it starts to merge with resentment, when the line between fantasy and reality blurs, and when players begin to view the virtual world not simply as an escape, but as a justification for their real-life frustrations. For young men who feel socially excluded, romantically rejected, or economically powerless, the gaming world becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a lens through which they interpret their position in society. Here, the digital dominance stands in stark contrast to the disempowerment they experience in their day-to-day lives. Over time, this can lead to a sense of grievance. Why is it that in-game I'm powerful, respected, admired, but in reality I'm ignored or ridiculed? Who's to blame for that? For some, the answer becomes dangerously simple: women. In this context, women are framed not as individuals but as gatekeepers, arbiters of sexual access, social status and self-worth. This is the cornerstone of Incel ideology, which tells delusioned men that they are victims of a world corrupted by feminism, where women have too much freedom, too much choice, and too little accountability. It reframes male failure not as a personal issue or a structural one, but as the direct result of female cruelty and social betrayal. According to this view, women are no longer human beings with agency, but the reason for everything that's gone wrong in these men's lives. Gaming communities, particularly unmoderated or loosely moderated ones, become ideal environments for this worldview to spread. Their anonymity, insularity, and humour-laced communication styles make them perfect for radicalisation through memes, in-jokes, and ironic posturing. Incel talking points rarely appear at first as overt hate speech. They're embedded in edgy humour, layered irony, and exaggerated personas, all of which provide plausible deniability while still reinforcing the idea of ideology. A joke about women only dating chads might seem harmless or even self-deprecating on the surface, but in context it echoes a belief system that dehumanises women and glorifies resentment. These beliefs are echoed, reinforced, and recycled across gaming platforms. Discord servers, Reddit threads like r/braincells before it was banned, YouTube channels, anonymous image boards, and Twitch chats. Users signal their frustration and are rewarded with community approval. They learn the language, the codes, the memes. It becomes a culture, one that valorises bitterness, mocks empathy, and sees any challenge to the status quo as part of a broader, woke feminist conspiracy. In this space, the incel isn't a fringe figure. He's understood, even admired. Radicalisation doesn't happen through some grand manifesto, but through the constant exposure to ideas that seem increasingly reasonable, the more often they're repeated, laughed at, and shared. The overlap between incel communities and gaming subcultures isn't incidental. Both revolve around largely male, often young, online populations. Both foster tribalism, in-group loyalty, and hostility towards outsiders. Both encourage long hours of online activity, often in isolation. And both are deeply shaped by a sense of cultural loss, a belief that something essential has been taken from them: status, identity, and purpose. Whether it's the belief that gaming is being ruined by social justice politics, or that dating is now rigged against average men, the emotional logic is the same. Something was ours, now it's not, and someone has to pay. In short, gaming doesn't radicalise on its own, but it provides the aesthetic, emotional, and structural terrain in which ideologies like Incel Dom can thrive. It offers a sense of control to those who feel powerless, a community to those who feel alone, and a villain who's looking for someone to blame. And without active intervention, through moderation, education, and cultural change, this pattern is likely to continue. One of the clearest, most disturbing flashpoints in the relationship between gaming culture and misogynistic extremism is the #Gamergate controversy of 2014, a watershed moment that revealed just how quickly online communities could mobilise hostility under the guise of cultural defence. At face value, Gamergate became a dispute over ethics in games journalism, sparked by a blog post written by the ex-boyfriend of an indie game developer, Zoe Quinn. The post made vague, unsubstantiated insinuations that Quinn had traded sexual favours for favourable media coverage, a claim that was later debunked but nonetheless used to incite a wave of moral panic. What followed was not an honest inquiry into journalism integrity, but an onslaught of harassment targeting Quinn and other women in the gaming industry, including critics like Anita Sarkisian and journalists like Leah Alexander. They were doxxed, stalked, sent rape death threats, and in some cases forced to leave their homes out of fear for their safety. What made Gamergate especially revealing wasn't just the scale of its cruelty, it was the way the movement disguised its misogyny beneath the surface of cultural grievance. The framing was deceptively simple. Outsiders were trying to change games. Women, feminists, and so-called SJWs, also known as social justice warriors, were painted as enemies attempting to censor or corrupt a beloved subculture. This narrative tapped into deeper anxieties within parts of the gaming community, particularly young men who saw themselves as embattled underdogs, protecting gaming from imagined cultural invasion. The result was a campaign that weaponized outrage, couched it in righteous indignation, and used it to justify systematic abuse. The tactics deployed during Gamergate were strategic, rehearsed, and often chilling effective. Doxing, the public release of personal information, became a common tool for intimidation. Troll brigades mass-reported accounts, flooded social media with targeted abuse, and coordinated attacks on forums and comment sections. Harassers took advantage of platforms' lack of moderation, exploiting Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, and 4chan to amplify their reach. This created a sense of total saturation. It wasn't just one or two bad actors, it felt like an entire swarm making escape or resistance seemed futile. Importantly, Gamergate wasn't a traditional movement. It had no clear leadership, no central manifesto, no formal organisation. Instead, it was a decentralised swarm, a loose coalition of individuals united by shared resentments, common targets, and the protective cover of irony and anonymity. It was precisely this structure that made it so resilient when challenged. Participants could disavow responsibility, claim it was just a joke, or insist they were merely defending free speech, but the effects were anything but trivial. The cultural and political impact of Gamergate reached far beyond gaming. Many of the harassment and mobilisation techniques pioneered during this campaign would later be adopted, sometimes explicitly by reactionary political groups, including the alt-right. Figures involved in Gamergate would go on to build careers as online provocateurs, YouTubers, and right-wing influencers. The overlap between online gamer identity and far-right politics was no longer speculative, it had become strategic. Gamergate showed that you could radicalise disaffected young men not by preaching ideology directly, but by cloaking it in cultural grievance, irony, and a community outrage. In that sense, Gamergate didn't just reflect a toxic undercurrent in gaming culture, it actively reshaped the internet. It helped legitimise harassment as a tool of political expression, reframed misogyny as resistance to censorship, and created an infrastructure for collective abuse that persists to this day. Platforms were slow to respond, if they responded at all, and in many ways they still haven't caught up. The decentralised model of Gamergate, leaderless but ideology-aligned, became a template not only for online radicalisation, but for how digital reactionary movements could grow under the radar of traditional scrutiny. Gaming culture in this moment became more than a subculture, it became a battleground, and the tools forged during Gamergate are still being used not just to target women in games, but to attack anyone who challenges regressive online spaces. Far from being a one-off incident, Gamergate was the prototype, a case study in how cultural anxiety, platform design, and algorithmic amplification can converge to create real-world harm. The language and tropes commonly found within gaming culture play a powerful, often underestimated role in desensitising players to harmful ideologies. Terms that might be considered deeply offensive or unacceptable in other contexts, slurs, rape jokes, violent threats, and overtly aggressive, hyper-masculine rhetoric, are frequently shrugged off in gaming spaces as harmless banter or part of the edgy humour that defines a community. This culture of casual cruelty isn't confined to a fringe group. In many multiplayer lobbies, Discord servers, and streaming chats as part of the ambient noise, ever-present, unchallenged, and normalised. This normalisation is particularly dangerous because it operates under a veneer of irony and performance. Slurs might be used for the lols, sexist jokes passed off as satire, and rage-filled rants disguised as entertainment. The defence is always the same, it's just a joke, but the impact is very real. The rhetorical sleight of hand allows hate speech to pass unexamined while still reinforcing discriminatory attitudes. For new players, especially younger ones or those familiar with the culture, entry into these spaces often comes with implicit ultimatum: conform to the prevailing norms or be pushed to the margins. In this way, online gaming environments become self-policing echo chambers. Hostility becomes the price of admission, and those who are objected as branded as oversensitive or accused of trying to ruin the fun. The process of indoctrination isn't formal, but it is effective. repeated exposure to misogynistic, racist or homophobic language, dull sensitivity to it. Over time, players may begin to adopt this language themselves, if only to fit in. What begins as just words can eventually evolve into ideology, especially when there are predominant figures leading the way. Even the content creators, streamers, YouTubers, podcasters, and commentators who play an outsized role in shaping the norms and values of gaming communities. These individuals aren't just entertainers. For many fans, they become trusted voices, role models, and in some cases, surrogate friends. The parasocial relationships that develop between content creators and their audiences blur the line between entertainment and influence. When a popular streamer mocks feminism, rails against woke culture, or complains about diversity in games, it's not just commentary, it's a signal. Viewers who may already feel aggravated or alienated interpret these statements as validation of their own frustrations. Some creators lean into this dynamic deliberately. They build brands around outrage, courting controversy to drive engagement. They stoke cultural grievance and mock progressive movements and rally their fans against perceived enemies, whether that's women in gaming, LGBTQ+ developers, or critics calling for greater inclusivity. The more provocative the content, the more engagement it generates. Comments flood in, shares go up, viewers feel embedded, the creator profits. But the influence doesn't stop at the content itself. Platform algorithms, especially on YouTube, but also TikTok, Twitch, and even Spotify, play a critical role in accelerating the radicalisation process. These systems are designed to maximise watch time and engagement, not to promote accuracy or social responsibility. As a result, users who click on a video criticising feminism in games, for example, are often recommended increasingly extreme content. What starts as a mild dissatisfaction, a video about bad female character design or woke ruining gaming, can quickly spiral at overt far-right talking points, conspiracy theories or incel propaganda. This is the so-called algorithmic radicalisation pipeline, where a user's journey into more toxic and extreme spaces are not just possible, but incentivised by design. This dynamic is especially potent among young male audiences who are both highly engaged with gaming content and searching for identity, community, and validation. In the absence of strong counter-narratives or active media literacy, these algorithms and influencers become their educators. They shape how viewers think about gender, politics, and power, often reinforcing deeply regressive worldviews while cloaking them in humour, charisma, or cultural nostalgia. What emerges is a cultural loop. Toxic language shapes attitudes, which are reinforced by creators, which are promoted by algorithms, which draw in more viewers, who then adopt the same language. It's a self-replicating system, difficult to interrupt without structural intervention. Critically, this isn't about individuals behaving badly, it's about systems. Platforms benefit financially from outrage and engagement. Content creators benefit socially and economically from cultivating loyal, reactive audiences. And gaming spaces continue to thrive on the myth of being apolitical, even as they function as ideological battlegrounds. In this environment, misogyny, resentment, and radicalisation don't feel like intrusions, they feel like the norm. It's important to be clear here. Not all gamers are misogynists, nor are all gaming spaces inherently hostile. Many individuals, players, developers, content creators, and critics alike are actively working to make the gaming world more inclusive, safer, and genuinely fun for everyone. There are countless communities that thrive on cooperation, creativity, and empathy. However, the persistence of toxic behaviours and extremist ideologies within gaming culture cannot be dismissed as the actions of a loud minority. The problem is not isolated, it's systemic, and systems by definition require structural solutions. One of the central reasons this toxicity continues to thrive is the chronic failure of the industry and its platforms to enforce meaningful moderation, accountability, and leadership. Game developers and publishers, especially the larger studios, have too often prioritised profit margins and player retention over community well-being. Their responses to harassment and discrimination tend to be reactive at best, superficial at worst. In many cases, interventions only come after public backlash or media scrutiny. Until then, the status quo is allowed to persist, a tactic message that safety is secondary to engagement. Moderation tools, where they exist, are frequently limited, opaque, or poorly enforced. Automated systems fail to catch nuance, and manual reporting systems are often frustratingly slow or toothless. Abusive players are banned temporarily, if at all, and return under new usernames with ease. Community guidelines, the documents meant to set behavioural standards, are often vague and inconsistently applied. What constitutes hate speech in one game may be tolerable in another, What gets one user suspended might be overlooked in someone with a large following. This lack of clarity fosters an environment where harmful behaviours can be brushed off as borderline or debatable, giving perpetrators room to escalate without consequence. Compounding this is the cloak of anonymity offered by online play. The ability to act without being seen, without real-world accountability, emboldens individuals to express and enact hostility they might otherwise suppress. Harassment becomes a game in itself, a performative act done for laughs, for status, or simply because no one's watching. Without meaningful consequences, this behaviour is not just permitted, it is rewarded. To genuinely confront this problem, both technological and cultural interventions are essential. On a practical level, better moderation systems must be developed, not only more effective, but more transparent and consistent. Platforms need to invest in real-time tools that empower users to protect themselves, while also enforcing serious consequences for repeat offenders. Reporting mechanisms should be streamlined, consequences should be visible, and guidelines should be clear and unambiguous. Community managers must be trained and supported to enforce these standards across all levels of engagement, not just when a scandal breaks out. Beyond moderation, the games themselves must evolve. Inclusive design, which means more than just diverse character options, can help reshape the underlying narratives that define gaming. Who gets to be the hero? Who gets to be the complex, powerful, vulnerable, or morally grey? Representation matters not just for visibility, but for the values it signals to players. When games challenge stereotypes rather than reinforce them, they begin to shift the culture from within. Equally important is education. Conversations about digital censorship, online safety, empathy, and critical media literacy should not be seen as add-ons, but as core to navigating a digital world. Players, especially younger ones, need the tools to understand and critique the media they consume, communities they inhabit, and the ideologies they're exposed to. This means challenging harmful narratives early, often, and in accessible language. And finally, we must move past the idea that gaming can or should be apolitical. The claim that games are just for entertainment, a neutral space free of ideology, is not only naive, but actively harmful. All cultural products are political, whether they intend to be or not. Games communicate values through mechanics they use, the stories they tell, and the characters they prioritise. When violence is rewarded, when women are reduced to props, when only one kind of masculinity is celebrated, those messages do not exist in a vacuum. They reflect and reinforce broader societal norms. More crucially, the communities built around games are themselves shaped by politics, by who is welcomed, who is heard, and who is silenced, and mainly who is to be excluded. To pretend otherwise is to allow regressive ideologies to thrive under the mask of neurality. True neurality is a cultural space as a myth, and often it serves as a shield for maintaining the status quo. If the gaming world is to move forward, not just as an industry, but as a culture, it must embrace its role in a powerful force in shaping identity, belief, and community. That means responsibility. That means listening to those voices of those harmed, and it means building something better, not just for gamers, but for everyone who loves stories, play, and the promise of what digital worlds can be. The connection between gaming culture, misogyny, and incel extremism isn't about blaming games themselves, it's about understanding the culture that surrounds them. Games don't radicalise people, but the spaces built around them, the forums, the chat rooms, the discourse, the comment sections, can quietly, steadily create an ecosystem where toxic ideas are normalised, reinforced, and even celebrated. That phrase, press X to radicalise, might sound provocative, maybe even exaggerated, but when you think about how immersive, emotionally intense, and community-driven gaming can be, how much time people spend in these digital worlds, it's not entirely far-fetched. These powerful spaces, and in the wrong hands, can be turned into pipelines for grooming, resentment, and radical ideology. This isn't about panic, it's about paying attention. Because until gaming companies, platforms, and players start taking these undercurrents seriously, until moderation improves, until accountability becomes the norm, until we stop pretending that gaming is somehow untouched by politics, this problem isn't going anywhere. But here's the flip side. Gaming also has massive potential to connect people, to tell new kinds of stories, to build communities that are inclusive, creative, and genuinely fun. But that doesn't just happen by default. It takes intervention, it takes action. So if you care about gaming, not just the pixels and the mechanics, but the culture we're building around it, then this is the moment to get involved, push back, speak up, and help shape the space into something better. Thank you for watching. If this raised some questions for you or sparked any thoughts, drop them in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going, and if you want to see more deep dives, hit subscribe.